Imagine looking at one of the most reliable hands the NFL has ever seen and deciding he wasn't worth the risk. That's exactly what happened before the 2013 draft. Scouts watched hours of film on DeAndre Hopkins and somehow walked away with doubts. They said he wasn't fast enough. They said he couldn't separate from defenders. Some even questioned his personality and whether he had the mentality to become a star, and then came the number that followed him everywhere: a 4.57 40-yard dash. For many teams, that was all they needed to see. In a league obsessed with speed, a time like that was considered average. Suddenly, analysts were labeling him as a limited receiver, someone who might catch a few passes, move the chains, and disappear. But what they didn't realize was that they were about to overlook one of the most dangerous receivers of the entire decade. Draft night arrived. Cameras focused on the top prospects waiting for their names to be called. Teams began selecting wide receivers one after another. Every time the commissioner walked to the podium, Hopkins sat there watching the board change. Another receiver gone, then another, and another. On the outside, he looked calm. But inside, something was building. Every name called before his was another reminder that the league didn't fully believe in him. Finally, the Houston Texans stepped up and made the call. DeAndre Hopkins was heading to the NFL. But that moment didn't feel like relief. It felt like the start of something personal. Because the doubts that followed him into the draft would end up creating one of the most motivated players the league had ever seen. And strangely enough, it all started with one number. That 4. 57-40 time became the thing scouts couldn't stop talking about. Analysts broke down his speed frame by frame. Some said defensive backs in the NFL would easily keep up with him. Others claimed he lacked the explosiveness needed to dominate at the next level. In a league filled with receivers running 4.3s and 4.4s, Hopkins suddenly looked ordinary on paper. Teams started convincing themselves that speed alone would decide his future. But there was one thing they weren't measuring, and it was the thing that mattered most: his hands. Back at Clemson, Hopkins had already shown flashes of something special. Playing for the Clemson Tigers, he wasn't just catching passes, he was making them look effortless. Quarterbacks trusted him with impossible throws. Defensive backs could be draped all over him, and somehow the ball still ended up in his hands. His catch radius was ridiculous. His body control looked almost unnatural. And when the ball was in the air, he had a way of making defenders feel like they never had a chance. Teammates had already seen it up close. They knew he wasn't just good. They knew he was different. But scouts kept going back to the stopwatch. Speed. That became the conversation surrounding Hopkins, even as his highlight tape showed one incredible catch after another. And by the time draft night arrived, that narrative had already spread across the league, which is why the waiting felt so long. One receiver after another was selected before him. Each pick came with cheers, camera flashes, and celebration. Meanwhile, Hopkins sat quietly watching the board. Some reports later suggested teams had concerns about his personality. Others believed he wasn't explosive enough to become a true number one receiver. Whatever the reasons were, they all added up to the same result. He kept sliding. Finally, the Houston Texans made their decision and called his name with the 27th overall pick. To most players, that moment would have been pure celebration. Years of work finally paying off. But for Hopkins, it was something else entirely. Because now he had a list of teams that passed on him, and he never forgot it. Once he arrived in Houston, the adjustment to the NFL began immediately. Rookie receivers often struggled to make an impact right away, but Hopkins started showing flashes almost instantly. Playing alongside veteran star Andre Johnson, he began learning the details of the professional game: route timing, defensive coverages, the small adjustments that separate good receivers from great ones. And slowly, the league started noticing something. That average speed didn't seem to matter. Defenders could run with him step for step, but it didn't change the outcome. When the ball arrived, Hopkins had a way of taking control of the moment. Contested catches started becoming routine. Tight windows didn't scare him. If the ball was even close, he believed it belonged.